Welcome to your new day. It is Thursday, December 20th, 8 o'clock in the East. John Berman is off. John Avlon joins me. Great to have you here.
Always fun.
You done with your Christmas shopping?
No.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll wrap this up over the next hour and you can head out.
And then we'll bail. Emotional support chicken, then Christmas shopping.
I love when you make the joke from 6 a.m.
It's important.
As of this hour, President Trump is standing by his controversial decision to pull U.S. troops out of Syria despite bipartisan outrage over this plan. Several senators have sent a letter to the president asking him to reconsider. One of them is his staunch ally, Republican Lindsey Graham, who called the decision, quote, a stain on the honor of the United States. The president claims that ISIS is defeated, but experts disagree, and they fear that he will create a power vacuum. One person, though, who is happy with the decision this morning is Russian President Vladimir Putin. He has just announced that he agrees with President Trump.
Meantime, the Senate passed a stopgap funding bill to avoid a partial government shutdown. If passed by the House and signed by the president, it'll keep the government funded through the holidays until February 8th. The Democrats have assured the measure does not include money for the president's border wall. So are they prepared to gain the House? Have Democrats essentially prevented President Trump's signature campaign issue, the wall, from ever being built?
All right, joining us now to shed some light on what's going on inside that White House is White House correspondent for the New York Times and CNN political analyst Maggie Haberman. Maggie, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
It seemed from the outside as though yesterday the president was flailing a bit in terms of not getting his border wall, and even after he had said that he was willing to shut down the government, but then Mitch McConnell going in a different direction, and then it seemed abrupt and sort of out of left field that he decided to make this announcement about Syria. In fact, his generals didn't know it. The Pentagon hadn't been briefed. So what was happening there?
I think you are correct to link these things. You had one instance, which is the budget fight where the president was bending. He was caving, frankly, pretty clearly, according to his most ardent supporters on Capitol Hill. He was abandoning, even if not permanently, at least in this moment, a campaign pledge to build a border wall that his supporters have believed he would do. And I think we're willing to give him a fair amount of latitude on for the first 2 years. But this was the best chance to get that through with a Republican-held Congress. It is very unlikely to happen going forward. And then what's a way to overshadow that? A way to overshadow looking weak is to look, quote unquote, strong by saying you are pulling out of Syria, which was another campaign promise. The problem is that pulling out of Syria is not really something that you can just do with a wave of a wand. It requires a plan. It requires answers on how this is going to take place. It requires a notification to Congress. It requires working with partners, and it requires at least an ability to make a coherent statement about why you are doing this and why this is in U.S. interests. These two things were related. But what happened with Syria yesterday, and again, we still don't know what this is going to look like, but it was a major, major moment that, as you noted before, appeared to only clearly please one person, and that is Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, and that's not a good look for this president or any American president. But of course, the problem with the questions of war and peace by tweet, as you point out, is the Pentagon's taken unaware, Congress and senators taken unaware, and a lot of the president's closest allies really turned on him. Didn't think he was looking strong by withdrawing. In fact, quite the opposite. Here's Lindsey Graham yesterday comparing him to President Obama.
I know this, if Obama had made this decision, Republicans would be all over him.
And that is far from the only senator coming after him.
Right, and it's striking considering that, as you note, it's Lindsey Graham who has been one of his staunchest defenders over the course of the last year. Look, this decision is reminiscent of what President Obama did in 2011 when he started withdrawing troops from Iraq. That decision has been criticized as helping provide a breeding ground for ISIS. You have allies and you have other members of the military saying, despite what the president says, that ISIS has been defeated, it has not been defeated. It still stubbornly controls, it might be smaller, but it does stubbornly control an area along the Syria-Iraq border. And just saying that it's been defeated is not going to eradicate that. The fear is that there are not enough troops who are trained to replace U.S. forces that are on the ground, that you're going to have to rely on other people's military who are not equipped the same way. And again, this, as we said before, there was no clear forethought that was articulated as this was announced by tweet. This is another one of these things, too, where you have seen some tension between the president and the defense secretary, Jim Mattis. We first started seeing this in 2017 when Jim Mattis had been slow-walking the president's demand that there be a ban on transgender members of the military. Things have devolved since there, and once again, you had Mattis imploring the president not to do this, saying that it could create chaos in its wake, saying that it could lead to all sorts of unknown instability in the region, and the president just went ahead and did it.
You know, this morning I've been joking, but not really, that I've been monitoring Fox and Friends because the president watches Fox and Friends. And this morning, our friend, Brian Kilmeade, is really taking the president to task over this, saying that it's a horrible idea. And it just makes me think, look, Maggie, you know, the president sometimes doesn't stick with one position. Today, he might switch his plan on pulling U.S. troops out of Syria.
Right, except that not everything, to your point, he might, indeed, and not everything can be done as an, oops, I'm just going to undo this. Even if he did that, it then creates such a sense of instability about the U.S. government, with our allies, with people who are watching the U.S. to see what the U.S. will do, to see if the U.S. is going to stick to what is in its stated interests. And this, you know, unlike the border wall, where he has been able to sort of tweet and kind of try to mask what he is actually doing with public rhetoric, withdrawing troops from Syria is not really something that you can claim that you're doing one thing and not do something else. Reality is catching up with this president, who has done a great deal over 2 years to try to create his own version of reality. Objective reality is beginning to, outweigh that.
Facts are indeed stubborn things, is what you're saying. Same theme, the president's stick-to-itiveness, but on the shutdown. So John Cornyn yesterday, after the Senate passed the CR, sounded very confident that the president would sign this. But he's been taking heat from members of the Freedom Caucus, taking heat among a lot of his allies in the conservative media environment. Do you think this is a done deal, or could the president decide he's going to veto and let the chips fall where they may?
I think that we will see all kinds of signals that he might not sign this up until the moment that he signs it. And I think the reason he's going to sign it is, at the end of the day, two things. Number one, shutdown, the president stated, and he really boxed himself in that meeting with Chuck and Nancy, quote unquote, a couple of weeks ago in the Oval Office, that he would proudly own a shutdown. But the reality is that nobody wants to own a shutdown. A shutdown is not good politics, despite everybody claiming there might be some net benefit after a period of time. A shutdown around Christmas is just not good. A shutdown ever is not good, but a shutdown around Christmas is going to look particularly bad. And don't forget, the president himself wants to go away for Christmas. He wants to leave for Mar-a-Lago, his Palm Beach property, later this week. If there is a shutdown, he can't do that. And so I think that he is as eager to get out of Dodge as a lot of lawmakers are. But I think that, look, what the criticism that he is receiving from his supporters, Ann Coulter, Mark Meadows, you name it, down the line, right, is not small, and it's the first time that we have seen it at this volume. So that might impact what he does over the next 24 hours. I don't think it impacts what he does ultimately.
And of course, there's also a question about what this would mean for the fate of his campaign promise on the border wall. Once Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats take control of the House, if that means that he would ever get his border wall. And so this morning, something interesting is happening, Maggie. There is a rebranding afoot.
I saw that.
Did you? So there's
the
a
slats?
tweet.
Yeah.
Yes. So I just
slats.
so what does the tweet say about the wall? It says that. Here we go. The Democrats who know steel slats
Paren wall. It's now primarily steel slats, secondarily a wall.
Are necessary for the border security, are putting politics over country when they're just beginning to realize that I will not sign any of their legislation, including infrastructure, unless it has perfect border security.
USA wins.
So now his new gambit is he won't sign any of their legislation.
Right.
And I've never heard him address it as border slats. So what's this about?
The goalposts have moved, right? I mean, he realizes there is not going to be a concrete wall, so he has to start rebranding it for his followers to look as if he is the one who created this, and this was not foisted upon him. And again, that will work with some of his supporters. It will work with some of his base. The problem is that you can't constantly try to wave away your previous statements and assume that nobody is watching. There is a weight to these. There is a certain collection of them over time. Again, his supporters, Mark Meadows and Coulter, didn't do him any favors, but they didn't do him any favors because they know where his voters are. But they're reminding people that this really was the last chance. If he was serious about getting this wall, you don't sign this continuing resolution to keep the government funded through February 8th. They are reminding people that while the president's going to blame Democrats when they take over next year, this was in his control to some extent. He just made a choice that was easier, which is, by the way, what every president does. It's just that not every president speaks in the absolutes that this one does.
That's right. And in fact, during the last budget season, he swore he'd never do it again. In very, very stark terms. So, I mean,
yes.
he's in a very tough place. Now in that tweet, he's trying to pass the buck and say he'll deny infrastructure, but it's clear, far from clear he's going to have the leverage.
It's also right. What is clear right now is that Nancy Pelosi holds a lot of cards. And I think that you saw that reaction on Capitol Hill yesterday, that she is clearly winning this process right now. I think the takeaway that a lot of people had, myself included, after his meeting in the Oval Office with them a couple of weeks ago with Senator Schumer and the speaker, the soon-to-be speaker, Nancy Pelosi, was that each of them had gotten what they wanted, right? I mean, the president got to sort of have this dramatic fireworks display, which I think was momentarily pleasing to him, certainly, and to some of his supporters. But Nancy Pelosi also got what she wanted, which was to lay down a marker that she is not going to be shoved around. And after this head-to-head over funding the government, she's the one who's going to look like she came out on top. That's a win for her as she is going into her new speakership. And
so didn't Senator Mitch McConnell also box the president in? I mean, he didn't have to get this passed in the Senate. He didn't have to bring this up.
Well, he knows what the politics are for his caucus, right? I mean, and Mitch McConnell is an institutionalist who cares about the Senate, and he cares about his members not having a problem. He does not consider, I suspect, a shutdown to be good politics for his caucus, and so he wanted this to go ahead. He thinks that it is the president's problem. The Senate has made pretty clear. He didn't have to bring this up, but he kind of did, because they've made very clear to the president, we are waiting on you to tell us what you want. And that has happened time and time again, where the Republican-led Congress has said to the president, who is the leader of the Republican Party, tell us what your priorities are. And he doesn't. He tries to sort of pick a menu of options where he chooses about 3 of them, sometimes in conflict with one another. And I think that McConnell was not going to take that chance again.
And the result is chaos. One other thing that came up over the evening is a memo written by Attorney General nominee Barr that really does lay out a pretty breathtaking view of executive power, doing a brushback pitch to the Mueller probe, specifically as it relates to obstruction. Maggie, what are you hearing? I mean, it seems highly likely that this influenced the president's decision to pick him, not that he was sort of an establishment consensus figure.
It's not clear that the president knew this memo had been sent, but certainly I think this is a view that Barr had articulated to the president. The thing the president said to people in the White House over and over as he was searching for his new attorney general to replace Jeff Sessions was he was obsessed with the question of, will somebody have to recuse themselves from the Russia probe? He talked to aides about this constantly. Barr clearly would not have to because he wasn't part of the campaign, and so that wouldn't even come up as a related question. But Barr had also made clear that he considered the piece of this investigation that the president considers most odious, which is the question of obstruction of justice, that he considers that to be a misuse of power, and that, I suspect, was quite pleasing to the president.
Maggie Haberman, great to get all of your reporting shared with us. Thanks you so much. All right, up next, they take over the House in less than 2 weeks. So what is the top priority for Democrats? Incoming Majority Leader Steny Hoyer joins us next.
And later, they ran towards the flames and pulled a man out of a burning car. And now the deputies who saved a life are telling us the story behind this incredible.
So overnight, the Senate passed a stopgap spending bill in an effort to prevent that partial government shutdown at the end of the week. The bill is, at the moment, expected to pass the House today, and then it must be signed by President Trump before it can take effect. Let's get a status report on this and so much more. Joining us now is incoming House Majority Leader, Democratic Congressman Steny Hoyer. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, Alice. Good to be with you.
Good to have you. So has a government shutdown been averted, or will some of your conservative colleagues in the House scuttle this?
No, I'm hopeful that we will pass the bill that's coming over from the Senate. It's unfortunate, however, that we're kicking the can down the road as opposed to resolving this issue, which I think was certainly within our reach. There are 7 appropriation bills which are pending and have not been passed or signed by the president. Six of those have bipartisan agreement. And very frankly, the 7th, Homeland Security, has overwhelming agreement, save for the wall, What we offered and what we would have thought a better policy was to pass the 6 on which we have agreement and fund those agencies through the fiscal year, and then do a CR, which is a continuing resolution which gives authority to spend money to Homeland Security for the balance of the year. Therefore, we would be stable and people would know what resources they had for the coming year. Now we have till February 8th, a short time, and we're going to have possibly another crisis where we fight about the wall. And that simply doesn't make sense. It's not economically responsible.
Right.
We ought to get on to our agenda, which deals with health care, which deals with education, which deals with wages and jobs, and reforms. That's what we ought to be doing.
Well, look, listen, I think that Americans have gotten used to Congress kicking the can down the road in terms of funding. I understand what you're saying you should do, but here's what I want to get your take on. You know, some of the president's most ardent supporters, some of his conservative base are saying that he's caving. That if he signs this, he's caving because he drew that line in the sand, that he wasn't going to bend unless he got his, you know, all of his money for the border wall. So do you think there's a chance he doesn't sign it?
Allison, my belief is we're going to have a majority of the Republicans vote for this bill today. They're going to vote for this bill because they think it's the responsible thing to do. It may not be perfect, but as I have said, the overwhelming majority of the spending in this in the bill has been agreed to by Republicans and by Democrats, so that just punting. Yes, they've become used to kicking the can down the road, and the public ought to get better than that from their Congress, in my opinion. We ought to, if we agree on 95% of a bill, we ought to pass it.
Yes. And as you sit there today, you believe the president will sign this?
I hope he will sign it, and my expectation is he will sign it, yes.
Okay, why do you think the president announced yesterday? Tell me about the timing and what you think of his announcement that he's going to pull U.S. troops out of Syria.
I thought it was impulsive, irresponsible, and dangerous. And I would hope that the president would reconsider. The only people happy today about this decision, in my opinion, are the Syrians, the Iranians, the Russians, and ISIS and its allies. It was a terrible decision that puts our country in a bad spot, but more importantly, puts some of our allies, like the Kurds, in a very terrible spot, who have been helpful to us. And it encourages ISIS. It doesn't defeat ISIS. The fact that the president says we have won is, as Senator Graham said earlier today, is fake news. We haven't won. And all of his advisors, all of the president's advisors, have indicated that we ought to be staying there to keep things as stable as possible and not to create a vacuum which Russia and ISIS and the Iranians are going to fill. It is a very dangerous and ill-advised decision, in my view, and I think the majority of Congress will share that view.
It's been reported that the president had a phone conversation with Turkey's President Erdogan before he made this announcement. Do you think that that's connected? Do you think that he took some sort of cue from Erdogan?
I hope it's not. I hope it's not, because Erdogan is going to do, I think, or has proposed or planned some very dangerous activity vis-a-vis our Kurdish allies and friends. And I think if the president has made a deal with Erdogan in any way, it is not good for the United States. It's not good for the Middle East, and it's certainly not good for our position vis-a-vis ISIS in Syria, Russia, and Iran.
Here's what the president says. He campaigned on this. Voters voted for him because they don't want U.S. troops to be the policemen of the world. I think I'm paraphrasing his position. And so doesn't he have a point that Americans are ready for troops to come home from Syria?
Allison, you remember he criticized President Obama for withdrawing troops precipitously and creating a vacuum which then ISIS could fill. So that I think this is contradictory, not consistent with. Yes, the Americans would like their troops home, but to create the vacuum that we've created, in my view, is going to create a more dangerous situation. And as you recall, we had to put more troops into Iraq to stabilize the situation, and ISIS grew, and that cost us a great deal of money and treasure in lives. So that I think that the president ought to reconsider this decision. I think General Mattis, Secretary of Defense Mattis, believes he should. I think his national security advisor said we were going to stay there for some period of time. It appears that this was the president's decision. It was impulsive, as so many of his decisions are, announced on a Twitter feed. This is simply not how we ought to conduct our foreign policy. And in this instance, I would hope sincerely that the president would reconsider this decision and understand that our presence is absolutely essential if he wants to, as he has said, confront Iran, stabilize Syria, defeat ISIS, and not leave a vacuum. And I'm not sure about this because, of course, his friend, Mr. Putin, is very happy about this decision because, of course, it leaves the field open to the Russians in Syria.
Congressman Steny Hoyer, we really appreciate you coming on New Day and sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. John.
A bipartisan group of senators calling on President Trump to reconsider. A bipartisan group of senators are asking the president to reconsider pulling U.S. troops out of Syria. Senators say the decision emboldens remaining ISIS militants and amounts to the U.S. ceding influence in the region to Iran, Russia, and the Bashar al-Assad regime. Now, joining us now is one of those letters' authors, independent Maine Senator Angus King. He serves on the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committee. Senator, thank you for joining us on New Day.
John, always a pleasure.
Well, what I want to ask you is, the response to this has been deafening. You joined with your other senators. And our own Jake Tapper was told by a senior administration official that this was a mistake of colossal proportions. So when you heard this information, what was the reaction behind the scenes in the Senate?
Well, the reaction, I think usually it takes a week to put together a letter like that, the one you mentioned, and it took about an hour, and you have people like myself and Jeanne Shaheen, Tom Cotton, Joni Ernst, Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio. I mean, it was bipartisan, it was instantaneous, and, near as I can tell, it may be 98 to 1 or 2. I heard Rand Paul thinks this is a good idea, but I haven't found anybody who thinks it's a good idea. There are really two problems, John. The first is the process. As near as we can tell, there was no consultation with allies, no consultation with the people in Washington, and particularly within the administration who deal in foreign policy and foreign affairs, who worked on the Middle East for years. It just came out of the blue on a tweet yesterday morning. And what really scares me is, how this might happen again in some very dangerous situation. You want your decisions made in a systematic way with all points of view considered. Apparently that didn't happen. So process is very worrisome here. But the other is the substance. I mean, the worst thing about this, for my mind, is that we're basically abandoning the Kurds. And the Kurds have been fighting for us. They've been working with us. They've been our key ally against ISIS in northern Iraq and Syria. And we're just walking away and leaving them to the tender mercy of the Turks, which this could be really, really bad. And of course, it also hands a victory. ISIS now, this is a recruiting tool. We defeated America. We sent them home. And they're going to be recruiting around the world based on this. Iran likes the decision. Russia likes the decision. Our allies don't like the decision. Israel doesn't like the decision. And it's stunning. It's just hard to believe that a decision of this consequence would be made, as I said at the beginning, without, as near as we can tell, without any serious consultation or discussion.
So given that litany of who benefits, Russia, Iran, Assad, why do
Don't
you
forget ISIS. ISIS benefits too. Yeah.
Why do you think the president made this decision? And do you think he can be convinced to change his mind?
I hope, number one, that he can be convinced, because the reaction has been so strong, and particularly from members of his own party and people who are generally, I mean, Tom Cotton is on that letter. There's no stronger supporter of the president in the U.S. Senate than Tom Cotton, but he signed on yesterday morning. Lindsey Graham has been a supporter of the president, and he signed on. So hopefully he will listen. And there's enough wiggle room here, because all we really have is this tweet. We don't have any details or timing, and I think there's a way he can, in effect, back off of this without, a dramatic retreat. But I hope he's listening, because this is really bad for the country. And the other thing I mentioned about the Kurds, here's the long-term problem for the country. We can't do anything anywhere without allies. Everything we do depends upon coalitions and allies. Who's going to be our ally when we abandon them in their moment of need, which is what we're doing with the Kurds. Why would anybody come and say, yeah, we'll join up and fight and take bullets for you, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, you're on your own, man?
Well, so look, obviously condemnation in the halls of Congress, but praise from Vladimir Putin today in his press conference. And speaking of Russia...
What does that tell you? That's all you need to know.
Probably everything. But you, of course, sit on the Senate Intelligence Committee. This week, 2 independent reports commissioned by your committee were released, authoritatively analyzing all the Russian disinformation on social media and the ways they tried to support Trump, his campaign, and Republicans over the course of 2016. My question to you is, it's not explicitly in either of those exhaustive documents any direct connection between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Is that consistent with your knowledge on the committee, or may there be more to come?
Well, we haven't finalized any work on that ultimate question of whether there was a connection between the campaign and the Russians. That wasn't the purpose of these studies. These studies were really stunning, by the way, to show the depth and sophistication of what the Russians did on social media. The social media people missed this. The platforms missed it when it was happening. And to be honest, our committee, when we started out, this wasn't one of our major points of attention. It has become one, and I give a great deal of credit to Chairman Richard Burr for really moving us on this issue. And it turns out to be this was one of the major ways the Russians were messing with us. And these studies, and you say there's nothing about collusion. Absolutely, that's true. But the studies make absolutely clear that the Russians' intentions were to help Donald Trump and to defeat Hillary Clinton.
The studies are also very clear that the big social media platforms were less than forthcoming with handing over information. One of the interesting black boxes is this question of these dark ads that Facebook ran with the Trump campaign and who they could have targeted. Has the Senate Intel Committee requested those ads to be handed over?
We are requesting additional data, and the studies were based upon data that we got in the first round from the social platform from Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. And I must say, as I say, I think they missed it in the beginning. I think they were naive about how they were being used. They seem to have gotten it now. They're taking it much more seriously. But these reports ought to really jolt them because, this is a very challenging situation, John, because we're an open society. We have the First Amendment. We have free speech. And the Russians are getting very clever. A lot of what they did, they did create their own content. They created their own websites and their own, conspiracy theories. But they also did a lot of work boosting organic American conspiracy theories. Do you see what I mean? In other words, they didn't create it, but they boosted it and spread it and used bots and made it much more powerful. One of their main intentions, which comes through in this report, was to suppress the African American vote. They'd spent a lot of work building up these websites to gain the confidence of African Americans. And then toward the end, they said, why bother to vote? Don't vote for Hillary. She's not with you. Vote for Jill Stein. It was a very sophisticated program.
Well, much more to come. And we look for a hopefully final report from the Intelligence Committee in January. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you, John.
All right, John, up next, former President Barack Obama plays Santa Claus. We'll show you how.
But first, new CNN film Love, Gilda looks at the incredible life of comedy legend Gilda Radner, and it airs New Year's Day at 9 p.m. on CNN. And here's a sneak peek.
Hi, I'm Gilda Radner. And, okay, now. People want to know what made you funny. From the time I was a kid, I loved to pretend.
She was the very first performer chosen for the cast of Saturday Night Live.
There, Rosanna dance.
They just loved her.
I basically stole all of my characters from Gilda.
I can do almost anything if people are laughing.
Boom, ba, ba, boom.
Gilda was just not quite herself.
One morning, she just said, I don't know what's wrong with me.
The comedian gets the most unfunny thing in the world.
No.
She felt that she could be of help, and that's exactly what she did.
How often do we get to know exactly how brave we are?
London's Gatwick Airport shut down this morning. Drones were seen flying over the airfield last night and several times this morning. The police are calling it a deliberate act. Flights are being grounded or diverted, complicating the travel plans of hundreds of thousands of passengers heading to holiday destinations. Police have ruled out terrorism as they track down the operators, but they won't reopen the airport until it can be deemed safe.
Oh, my gosh. All right. It is a pivotal day in the case against disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein. He faces 5 felony charges, including 2 counts of rape. Weinstein will appear in court looking to have those charges dropped, and that's where we find CNN's Jason Carroll. He is live outside of the courthouse for us. What do we expect, Jason?
And good morning to you, Allison. Well, that's a big question. What will Judge James Burke decide? Will he dismiss all of the charges against Harvey Weinstein? Most of the legal experts that I've spoken to, even spoke to a representative from Harvey Weinstein's camp late yesterday, Allison. They all say that would be very much of a legal long shot here. Weinstein facing 5 criminal charges, including 2 counts of predatory sexual assault, 1 count of criminal sexual act in the first degree, 1 count of first-degree rape, and 1 count of third-degree rape. This involves 2 accusers. Again, the defense is looking to have all of these charges dropped. They say that they have evidence which shows that the sex was consensual. What type of evidence? Well, they say they have emails, which they say shows friendly correspondence between Weinstein and these 2 accusers after the alleged incidents took place. So, again, they want all of these charges dropped. So what could the judge do out here later on today? Well, a number of different things. One, dismiss all the charges, which, again, looks to be a legal long shot. He could set a court date. This is what the prosecution wants. Or he could do something sort of in the middle and set forth an evidentiary hearing. This would kick the can down the road just a little bit, and both sides would come back at a later point, present their evidence that would later be debated in court. Of course, all this happening under the umbrella of the Me Too movement. A number of members of the Me Too movement expected to be out here later on today. Harvey Weinstein expected to be here today as well. He's expected to show up just a few moments from now. John?
Fascinating. A Yemeni mother is with her dying 2-year-old son this morning in California after the president's travel ban kept her from entering the country earlier this week. She landed late last night before heading straight to Children's Hospital in Oakland with her husband. She's reuniting with her 2-year-old son, Abdullah, who's on life support, and the U.S. State Department granted the mother a visa this week after her husband made a public plea here on New Day for the process to be expedited.
I am so glad that happened still in time.
Yeah.
And it happened right after our show that she was granted that emergency visa. So we're so glad to bring you that update. Okay, another feel-good story. Former President Barack Obama suited up as Santa to surprise children at a D.C. hospital. He decked out in a Santa hat. He delivered presents and holiday cheer. As you can see, the holiday staff greeted him with a chorus of "We wish you a Merry Christmas." This one little girl was completely stunned when he walked into her room. Oh my gosh, that is so sweet. He told another patient, quote, "Wherever the people you love are, that's where Christmas is." It was during his presidency that he and former First Lady Michelle Obama also visited this hospital a number of times.
Love it. I mean, first of all, I like rocking a Santa hat.
Yes, I do too.
It's a good time.
We should do that tomorrow.
Oxygen does have an advantage when it comes to storage. That's because oxygen in bagged produce is replaced with a non-reactive gas like nitrogen, and that helps preserve nutrients. On the flip side, a fresh bundle of spinach sits on a shelf for several days and is exposed to air, light, and moisture. And so nutrients rapidly decline. So packaged greens may be a more appealing option if your veggies tend to sit in the fridge for a few days. In that case, a bit of convenience will go a lot further than a bit more freshness. But whether they're in a bag or out in the open, veggies are still an important part of a healthy diet.
Food as fuel.
All right, you have to see this. 2 Texas deputies ran towards a burning car to save a life, and their heroic actions were all caught on video.
Can you pull him out? He's on fire. Sir. Hurry.
Sir. Give me your arms. Carlton, I need your help. It's too hot. Come on.
Oh my God. The 2 officers dragged the unconscious man out of the car, and then they dunked him in a puddle of water to put out the flames that surrounded his body. The man survived. he is in stable condition this morning. And joining us now are those two officers that the video shows. We have Deputies Carlton Carrington and Braden Bosnango. Guys, you are superheroes.
I wouldn't say that, but...
My gosh.
Yeah, no.
I mean, seriously, Deputy Carrington, let me start with you. When you were running towards the fire, obviously it was intense heat. Were you afraid at any point that you were going to catch on fire, or was the heat too... How did the heat feel when you were running towards the fire?
On the initial approach, I wasn't that concerned with the heat, but once I reached in the vehicle and started pulling the man out, that's when it really hit me how extremely hot the vehicle was. I could see the man's clothes on fire and his skin literally melting off of his body, and that's when I realized I didn't feel the heat on me, but I realized that's how hot it actually was.
What about you, Deputy Bosnango?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, it was pretty hot. I mean, it melted my body cam a little bit, and I mean, you could feel the heat radiating from the car from, I don't know, probably 5-6 feet away at least.
Yes, you were wearing the body cam that you were wearing that night that captured all of this video, and it melted. I mean, that tells you how hot it was and how close you all were to the fire. When you saw that man on fire, in flames, in the car, did you think that it was too late?
Initially, I thought there's no way we're going to be able to get this guy out, but we're going to, you know, try our hardest to get him out, but I didn't think it was going to be possible. And I really didn't think that he was going to survive just because the volume of flame that was completely around him and the entire passenger compartment of that vehicle. I mean, it was crazy to see.
I mean, it sounds like it was even harder than it looks like from this video, because you ran up and, correct me if I'm wrong, you couldn't open the passenger side door. You had a harder time getting him out. How did you extricate him?
Yeah, the door, when the vehicle crashed, it had flipped several times when it left the roadway, and the door was lodged shut. We had to pull him through the window. The windows had all busted out and were no longer on the vehicle. So we had to pull him up over the door frame, or the little door jamb of the window there, and pull him out that way.
And then how did you...
He was probably 180 pounds or so, and trying to lift 180 pounds straight up and then over a solid barrier was it was rather difficult, but not to mention like I said, his skin was sloughing off. That made him very slippery. Plus the heat and trying to get him over that window was not an easy task.
Yeah, we can imagine. I mean, having to lift somebody up that's 180 pounds when they're not on fire and the flames aren't burning you. By the way, we should let people know that car exploded like 20 to 30 seconds after this video. Is that right?
There were a couple of, it wasn't full-fledged, the car blew up, but yeah, there were some explosives.
Once we got him out of the vehicle and got the fire out, I said, "Hey, Boz, let's let's move him a little bit just in case the car does go." So we moved him 15 or 20 feet away, and just a couple seconds later, there was a small explosion. So we moved him another 20 or 30 feet away after that, and then there was another small explosion. But I think we were in a safe zone then.
Whose idea was it to dunk him in the puddle? Did you think of that as you were running there? How did you know that that would save his life?
That was of pulling him out of the car. Once we brought him back and the puddle was there, it was just kind of utilized as a tool at that point. But initially when we were getting him out, it was just to get him out of the vehicle, and then it so happened, luckily, the puddle was there, and then we utilized it to our advantage.
Deputy Carrington, not to get too personal, but I did hear that right before you saved this guy's life, you really, really had to pee. And you did not do that because you got this emergency call. Instead, you jumped into the car and went to save this guy's life. And you now believe that had you taken time to go pee, this would have turned out much differently?
Yes, ma'am. I'd been on shift for a little while, and I needed to relieve myself, and I just pulled up to one of our substations, and the call went out. And, you know, we get traffic accidents all the time, and I was going to relieve myself, then head to the accident, and then I heard them say that the vehicle was fully involved and there was a passenger trapped inside the vehicle. So I decided to forego my pit stop and go ahead and go to the accident. And I honestly believe that if I would have made that 2-minute delay, that the outcome possibly could have been a little different.
I think that's right. And I think that that really brings it home for all of us. You take an emergency call even when nature is calling, and you saved a life. And we really appreciate you guys showing us the video and your heroism. It's just astonishing. Thank you very much, deputies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
What a powerful, great story. Great guys.
The president defending his plan to pull America